How's it going, everybody? And welcome to episode 263 of the Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is going to be a good one. It's about an upcoming seminar, the GLDA seminar, which happens every year in February. And we've spoke about it on the podcast before. And every year they have a different theme. I think the last time we chatted, it was in relation to it could have been 2 years ago for that seminar, and I think it was in relation to sort of gardening and designing more in harmony with nature. And this year's seminar has an interesting theme. So it's resilient gardens and landscapes is the overriding theme on it. And there's some really, really good speakers on the day. So Anne-Marie Powell, many of you would be familiar with, Adam Whitburn, uh, Charlotte Hitchmott, who I'm not actually familiar with, Wendy Allen, and Henrik Stoneman. Again, not familiar with all of the speakers, but some of them I know, and yeah, some excellent speakers. But the overriding theme is resilient gardens and landscapes, and that's going to be a really interesting chat. So the seminar is on the 22nd of February. It's in the Crown Plaza in Dublin, and to chat about it, I'm delighted to be joined by two of the members of the GLDA. So Deirdre Prince, who works in the Parks Department in Dublin, I think you said, Deirdre, was it?
Dublin City Council, yes.
Dublin City Council. So yeah, we might chat about that in a minute as well. And Kinta Oakes, who's chairperson of the GLD at the moment. So both very, very welcome to Master My Garden podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, so as I said, we spoke about the seminar in the past. I mentioned it last year, and then we had a kind of a more in-depth episode on it 2 years ago. But this year's theme is quite interesting, and I think that some of the speakers there are excellent, so it's going to be good. But maybe before we get into that, just give us a quick overview of what you do yourselves. So Kinta, your current chairperson. So tell us about your own design business, and also your role and the GLDA's role, I guess, within the landscape here in Ireland.
Well, I run a small practice with my husband, who's an architect in Bray.
Nice combination.
Yep, yeah.
Yeah.
He does the inside and I do the outside. So what I'm most impressed with recently, I do a lot of planning permission applications, and the councils are now asking with each application that you have a landscape design with it, and then you try and do your best with biodiversity and sustainability,
Yeah.
looking after the water, planting native plants as much as you can. With the GLDA, I've been with them for 6 years on council and working on the Compass magazine
Yeah.
as part of the editorial team. We generally are an organisation that is for garden designers, horticulturists, and landscape architects, designers, and the membership is open to anyone who's interested in gardens or garden design. And there's a varying range of memberships as well within the GLDA. So you can be a corporate member, you can be a friend, you can be a professional member, which you have to apply for with your portfolio. And there's also student membership as well. So it's anybody who has an interest, as I said, in gardens, garden design, landscape architecture.
Brilliant. And what's the sort of overall aim, stroke goal, or mission statement of the GLDA generally?
Do you want to take that?
Well, the overall goal is, our mission statement, I suppose, would be to what's the word? Is to develop an awareness of good garden and landscape design, and to support garden and landscape designers in their work. So what it is a really good network of individual practices. So most of the practices are just sole traders, but there's a network of support and knowledge sharing between the GLDA members, which I think supports the work, and also I suppose it supports how important garden design and landscape design is, from an environmental point of view as much as anything else, so it's a really good organization for that, so we are quite supportive of each other. So
yeah, and the seminars over the last few years have been, the overriding themes have been about how landscapes are designed, gardens are designed in harmony with nature, and I suppose taking into account change in climate and all those type of things. So, and this year's theme seems to be kind of no different. It's building resilient gardens for the future, I guess, and resilient landscapes for the future. So maybe we'll start to chat about the this year's seminar, which is obviously coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And I guess, Deirdre, with your work in Dublin City Council, there's probably aspects that will translate to how they go about their business on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I suppose the themes over the last few years have become a little more environmental and climate aware themes, and I think it's just expressing how important our work is in contributing to that. But so gardens and landscapes are just not nice to have or nice to look at. There's it's showing the different layers of how important they are from an ecological point of view, from a climate resistance point of view, or pollution control. So it's all those layers that are hidden under the aesthetics, and that's why I think our themes have changed a little bit over the years, to reflect that. Obviously, we're all plant and garden and landscape enthusiasts, and we love nothing better than beautiful pictures of gardens, but it's to explain the environmental benefits of what we're doing is really important. I suppose of my work, I'm a landscape architect in Dublin City Council Parks Department, and my work is predominantly based on adapting inner city built up areas to be more climate resilient, to maybe depave areas to allow to open up more areas for sustainable urban drainage, planting trees to mitigate particulate matter, or sorry, remove particulate matter from the air, creating pollination friendly space. So a lot of my work day to day is based on this, and so I think one of the things that's really important about our themes of our seminars that we're bringing all of this to our network of members and delegates, that like it's a part of my day-to-day work, and it's in my DNA now at this stage, I think. But it's to try and share that knowledge and all, like, to learn. Every time we have a seminar, it's an opportunity to learn, and then we've got really great experts on it, so that's what's really interesting. It's also really invigorating to hear other people from all over the world who are just as passionate about landscape design and environmental impacts as we are.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. And just in relation to your work with Dublin City Council, there's huge work goes on in all the cities around the world, with different each landscape person in your role in other cities. They might have different sort of priorities, let's say. I know that cooling in certain cities is massive, and using trees to have a cooling effect within cities is huge. Would you say that the flood and excess water is probably the biggest challenge in Ireland, or do you come across these challenges of overheating and needing to cool areas?
I suppose in the historically, we probably would never have considered the heat island effect in Dublin specifically as being an issue. But I think, as our climate is changing and our summers are becoming hotter and drier, that cooling, the need for cooling areas is becoming more of an issue. But I think in Dublin and in Ireland, the flooding is a huge concern, and particularly in built up areas in the city where the drain system is there for a long period of time, that has had to and it has to cope with more and more rainwater runoff as we seal up more and more of our land, which just exacerbates the risk of running into our rivers and seas, our polluted drains. So hopefully, I think we may have reached a changing point or a tipping point where we are starting to realize that covering over our front gardens or sealing them all in, creating huge swathes of paved areas. That's contributing to this increase in rainwater runoff that we are now that's the challenge that we have in the city. So, now drainage engineers, if when I go to a drainage engineer's presentation, it looks more like a landscape proposal than it ever did before. Whereas, I was an architect. I trained as an architect originally, and the guiding principle in architecture was get the rain, get it out, get it away from the building as fast as possible into the drains. And now it's the opposite. It's like, slow that whole thing down. Try, and green roofs or green or blue roofs, rain gardens, all of that is a way of slowing all this down, and depaving areas, again, trying to infiltrate the water at a slower rate. All of this is a way of slowing the water into the drains which are at capacity. I think it's just hopefully we've changed our thinking towards.
Yeah, for sure. And it does seem like, the types of rain that we're having for the last number of years does seem to be very intense. And while we get a lot of rain in Ireland generally, it's the amount we get in short periods of time that seems to be causing a lot of issues over the last number of years, and that definitely seems to be intensifying, year to year. And it mightn't be always in the same place, but we are definitely seeing that being an issue. How, Kinta, would you see that sort of translating to your day-to-day job? In more on the domestic side, as you said, you're designing with your husband, and he's an architect, and you're working hand in hand. So how does that translate? Is it a similar scene that you're coming across?
Yeah, well, I'm quite passionate about the fact that, if I see people paving over their front gardens, where is the water going to go during these events? And the way I see we individuals can all do this, designers as well, can design permeable surfaces for the rain to go through. So, for instance, I redesigned my front garden recently, and it's gravel, basic gravel and planting beds. I used to have a lot of flooding with the lawn before that, and I don't have flooding anymore. So basically, the gravel and the hardcore acts as the water attenuation area to stop the water going out onto the street. So that's what I would be highly aware of as well. And rain gardens, a couple of my beds are like 200 millimeters down from the ground surface, so the water just drains into there, and that's another holding area for the water.
And so what does that look like in the ground? So that's an area you dig out and you put some sort of a plastic cage in it, is it? Or what does that look like?
No, it's just not filling it up to the soil, to the top.
Okay.
You can put gravel in underneath at the base of it if you have an issue to drain it away. But what we really want to do is get the water back into the aquifers. I have a problem with, I live in Bray, and there's always a problem when we have an intense rain event that the beach gets closed down because the stormwater drains, or drainage system has become overwhelmed, and it's all spilling out into the sea. And I think it happens around Dublin Bay as well. Whenever there's a huge rain event, they have to close the beaches to people swimming. And I guess basically, okay, you can't swim, but what about the poor marine life, that are getting this pollution coming into their habitat?
Yeah,
So
for
it's
sure.
about protecting the rivers and the seas as well, I think,
Yeah,
So it's actually a bigger picture. Do you know what I mean? It's not just, okay, so on my garden, my little patch, I can do something. And if everybody does something, then that can slow the water down and stop the drains from being overwhelmed.
Yeah. I think that's kind of that has been a message over the last couple of years on the podcast, is that, individually we all feel like there's not much we can do about some of these sort of bigger picture things that are happening, whether that's the collapse in habitats or biodiversity. And I suppose the message has been, with various guests over the last couple of years, is that, we all have a small part to play, and all those small parts added together sort of become a powerful force. Yeah.
And of course, you have to say what plants can actually deal with the drought conditions and the flooding conditions. So there are plants out there that can cope with that, and that's part of our seminar as well. you know.
Okay. So
Interesting. Sorry to cut across you.
no
About
problem.
that is the fact that we have huge flood events, but we also have huge drought events.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, increasing wind events. So those plants have got to do all three jobs at the same time. So it is. And actually, Henrik Schoeman, one of our speakers, has done a lot of research on this. Um, Resilience of specific trees, to cope with these different climate events.
Yeah. So everything that you guys are seeing day to day professionally is, it's feeding into, I suppose, what the theme of this seminar is, and it's as we said, it's resilient gardens and landscape. So that's the overriding theme of it, but there's some seriously good speakers here, some of which I'm not familiar with. So maybe, Deirdre, you might just take the first speaker and just sort of broadly talk. I know there'll be some surprises hopefully for you on the day, but broadly talk about what their talk at the seminar is going to be about.
Yeah, no, so I just mentioned Henrik there, and he is the associate professor at the Swedish University of Ag Science in Gothenburg, and he's also the scientific curator in Gothenburg Botanical Gardens as well. And his focus is on how plants can adapt to specific environmental conditions, and a lot of it has to do with urban environments, and how specific subspecies of certain trees are more resilient than others. So he's done a lot of, from we obviously just get a little
synopsis.
So the title of his talk is Developing a Language in Selecting Trees for Gardens and Public Spaces. So basically, it's to look and see how we can be much more accurate with our tree choice, with our and how adaptive that is. And I think our recent storm has brought this more to the fore in what trees didn't survive the storm and for what reasons did they not survive. So even with regards to wind resilience and how they adapt, so I think that's a really topical conversation to have. So I'm really looking forward to his presentation.
Yeah, for sure. Funny enough, where I'm based here in the Midlands, County Laois, the storm was nowhere near as bad as it was in loads of other areas.
Okay.
But I had to travel up through Roscommon, North Roscommon, up into Mayo earlier this week, and I couldn't believe it actually, because obviously you see the news and you see the damage, particularly of people's polytunnels and all the rest of it, which are generally vulnerable structures anyway. But I was blown away by the amount of tree damage and kind of unusual tree damage that I saw up there. So there's the obvious one where you see the big forestry of the singular planting, which it's flattened. That's obvious. We've seen that on the TV. But what really struck me was huge mature trees that are just popped over with like 30 and 40-foot round root zones just sticking up in the air.
Yeah.
And okay, some of the areas where I was driving, it's obviously stony ground, so maybe they're not getting down deep enough, but they have been there. Like I'm talking about trees that are 100+ years old, the ones that I would consider to be the most resilient type trees that you can get, and yet still here they are lying down with their roots up in the air, and that struck me as something that was really, really odd, because we've all seen storms before, but I was taken aback a little bit by some of these that were flattened up that neck of the woods.
Yeah. I think Kilmacarra lost a lot of trees. The botanical garden down in Wicklow.
Yeah.
Seamus O'Brien runs, and really, really good specimens, were gone and lost with the storms, the two recent storms that we had.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and it's sad, but there is, and I guess this talk will kind of hone in on that. There is learnings there, I suppose, going forward, because while that was, as they said, it was kind of once in a lifetime type storm, but there is loads of other ones that have been sort of bombarding us on a yearly basis for the last few years. So there has to be lessons there, I guess, somewhere.
Yeah.
So if you want to, Kinta, introduce us to the next speaker on the day.
Yeah, well, there's Charlotte. Actually, funny enough, Charlotte and Wendy Allen have worked together on another project. Charlotte is the director of ARC, which is the Action for River Kennet Trust. And she's dedicated her career to water-related issues. And the Kennet Trust actually is involved in keeping the habitat of the river clean for birds and wildlife. And she's also led several award-winning initiatives aimed at protecting and enhancing river catchments. And so she's very passionate about that. And she will advocate for nature-based solutions to this. So her title of her talk is Rethinking Rain. And she will talk about the impact of changing rainfall patterns and adapt landscapes to new climate challenges. That's what her talk is about. And Wendy is an award-winning garden designer. She won, I think it was Hampton Court, she won a gold medal for front garden design on water attenuation. She is very passionate about suds.
Okay.
Yeah, so she even wants to look at some of our suds when she comes to visit, you know, in the city centre. And she's read some, she's also worked with the UK Rivers Trust as well, and creating implemented rainscapes for the benefit of the communities and for biodiversity. And her title is The Resilience of Small Things. Her presentation will talk about how small suds interventions was exactly what I was talking about, you know, front gardens and things like that can have an impact on our environment and create some resilience to the weather changing patterns that we're having.
Yeah, they sound like very interesting, and well, for Ireland generally, they're an interesting topic because, you know, rain and our association with rain, how we deal with rain, is becoming more and more important. And I could be wrong in this, but when it comes to rivers, I think we're a little bit, you know, we're a little bit lax on that. I don't think we understand the, you know, how to slow water in rivers and smaller streams, and how beneficial that can be. I think we kind of, I could be, as I say, I could be wrong on that, but it feels like we don't know enough about it, or there's not enough people talking about it here, maybe.
Yeah, I know there's some community thing in Galway organisation, because they have a lot of flooding. My son has recently moved and he's living in the city centre, and every time there's a rain event or a storm, the sandbags come out and, you know, to prevent the water getting into the building. So that's pretty serious, I think, you know. And yeah, I guess that we have to start dealing with it properly. But I like the way things are going, as Deirdre said before, nature-based solutions. I mean, even in Buddhist Town, I noticed there a few months ago that they had put in curbs with gaps between them. So instead of the water going down to drains, they were going into what we call swales.
Yeah.
And those swales are all planted up. So it's a very attractive way of enhancing, you know, the landscape as well by planting, but we're also, you know, holding water instead of it going into our drains. So
yeah, you're slowing everything going into the drains.
Yeah.
And I've seen it used a lot more here, and I don't know what the term is on it, but you know, directly around a house, where here in Ireland traditionally we run footpaths up to it generally, not always obviously, but generally we run footpaths up to it. But I see a lot of designs recently where the footpath doesn't run to the house, and you have little small sort of gravel areas right close to the house. And there seems to be more and more of that coming through. Now, you're probably seeing more of this sort of these practical things coming through, but it's something that I have noticed for sure.
Well, what you would do is if you're building your paths, you actually slope them to 150 slope, so they drain into the garden beds, and that takes a lot of water away as well. And I've actually got, you know, a drain coming from my roof going into a soak pit into the front garden, because that's another area. There's a lot of, you know, we have to take care of the water coming down off our roofs and things like that as well. And you can do the mini, you know, planters where the water goes into it, and then if it overflows, it goes off somewhere else.
Yeah.
So there's lots of suds interventions that we can do around our own homes as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so next speaker, I suppose, Adam Whitbourne, who's he's based in Ireland, and a lot of people will be familiar with Adam, but it looks like it's going to be a very interesting talk. So tell us a little bit about that one.
So we're delighted to have him. Like, as you said, a lot of people are aware that he's one of the garden managers the garden manager at Blarney Castle and Gardens, and I suppose he's been looking after that space for a number of years now. And obviously his commitment to wildlife and biodiversity is obvious there. So his talk is moving the goalposts of managing and planning for changing times. And I think if you look at a lot of our heritage landscapes within the country, they have a huge contribution to make to climate change, and are obviously very affected by climate change. So he's going to talk about how he's going to managing a big space like this, and adapting to evolving challenges, particularly with climate change. He's going to just offer some insights into how he's managing it and how best to move forward. So it'll be very interesting to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, for sure. So that's obviously an estate that, as you say, all of those estates, a number of years ago would have had a certain aesthetic, but a lot of them now are changing, are changing tack, obviously, probably less maintained grass areas. I'm sure now they have an eye on planting and are changing their planting schemes and their planting styles off the back of that. So yeah, that sounds like a really interesting one as well.
And particularly, I suppose, in like you say, the traditional estates like that, which may have had a lot of emphasis on annual planting displays that may not have offered much pollination value. So there's a move away towards rightly so, towards more pollination friendly herbaceous perennials that are in the ground, leaving places, as you say, unwilded, or untamed, or not maybe being as pristine with your maintenance, and how that benefits a lot of different habitats and the ecology in the area. So
yeah,
I suppose it's the management issues as well, isn't it? It's like Phoenix Park would be a classic. I think it looks brilliant now. They're letting the grass grow and they're cutting it in September, and I think it's more attractive than just looking at a green lawn.
It is good. I suppose it's a learning curve for for the public to realize what's beautiful. So sometimes brown and a little bit less manicured is beautiful. Well, I do think it is, but it's to bring the public along to realize that this is not just we can't just be concerned with aesthetics of gardens and planting anymore. It's the layers of how important it is from an environmental or pollination point of view. That's what we need to be emphasizing more than the aesthetics. So.
Yeah, I think it's a change of perception, obviously, and it probably does take a little bit of time and then a little bit of a reframe of what we previously thought. Like kind of a good example, and anyone that listens to the podcast is probably sick of me saying this, but I have a native wildflower meadow at the front of the house, which took out a good bit of lawn. Main reason was didn't want to be cutting it the whole time. Tried to reduce that workload a little bit, which again, I suppose does, some of the bigger places would have that issue as well. They don't have the resources, or they don't maybe want to have the environmental issue of going out on big lawnmowers and mowing huge spaces now, so they're converting. But the funny thing about the wildflower meadow is that a native meadow looks absolutely fantastic for a kind of a short enough window. So it looks fantastic from probably May through to, I guess, the end of June. And everything before that is, you can see it's building up to something, but it's not quite the full meadow yet. And everything after that is a fading colored meadow. So in terms of the aesthetic, it looks fantastic for a short window. But for me, what has been probably the biggest, I suppose, the thing that I've got the most joy from looking at it is the biodiversity in it. So again, I've mentioned it 100 times before. I never had bullfinches in the garden, but since that meadow went in, I've had bullfinches. If you walk through the meadow, every sort of, I'm not an insect expert by any means, but every sort of insect imaginable will rise from the meadow. As a result of that, there's an unbelievable amount of birds in there eating the seed heads and I guess some of the insects. And that has been the real kind of win for me, is that there's a beauty that's not necessarily the standard beauty that you're expecting from a meadow. It's a different type of beauty. So it meant a kind of a reframing of what I was thinking in relation to that. So, but it certainly has been, again, like to see a pair of bullfinches for me was a huge thrill. And yeah, it's a reframing of what I originally would have thought.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. I mean, what you just said there is absolutely fantastic. It's rethinking what's beautiful, and the beauty is all those different layers of the insects and the bullfinches, and so it's not I equate it to like we don't need everything to look like Disney. It doesn't all have brightly colored green, all the year. That the beauty is in the decay sometimes, and allowing those other layers, of the ecology in it to develop a little bit more. And I think and I see it even in the city with our landscape schemes, that we obviously have moved away from our annual planting, and that we're looking at more ecologically ecological planting mixes that allow for that. But sometimes they don't look the prettiest. They might just look a little bit disheveled. And it's to bring the public along with that can sometimes be a little bit hard, because they just see a mess, or they see a lazy council that's not maintaining. Well, really, sometimes we've had to put signs up saying we're leaving this because of X, Y, and Z, and this is the benefit. And so, I mean, it will change. It's just it will change in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting at the Bridgeford Street Park that you're involved in, Deirdre, and that was a fantastic initiative. And I remember going to the opening of it. Deirdre invited us along, and the landscape architect who was involved in that, Dermot Foley, that one of the first things he said is, "These plants are not weeds." And I thought that was fantastic. These plants are not weeds. They're valuable biodiverse resources. For, as you say, birds, insects, and creating habitats. And a habitat has to be able to feed the insects, give them water and shelter. That's the three key things that a landscape should really do for wildlife and insects.
And that project, and I'm not familiar with that project that you're talking about, but so the public perception of that, as at a glance, somebody passing by in a car or on the train or wherever it is, I'm not sure, but if somebody looks at that at a glance, they may see something that's untidy. But how, aside from posters, how else do we go about explaining that previously this was a green space that was mowed on a weekly basis, and now it's an ecosystem all to itself? How do we go about, translating that information to somebody who's passing by?
Well, have you seen the signs as, this is not weeds, this is the place for bees. And I think those signs help the councils are putting out onto the the side of the roads and things like that.
Yeah.
But I also think, Kinta, that if, like, say with Bridgeford Street Park, so I manage that park, and I bring people around it a lot. The local people are really proud of the fact that they have something unique. It's a little like Marmite. You might go in and look, this is just all weeds. But I think if you bring people around it, which I do a lot. So, John, if you're in Dublin, give me a shout and I'll bring you around the park. It's to show you get a deeper appreciation when you're immersed in it. And you can see how all these spaces are actually really filled with a variety of planting. And I've gotten rid of the word maintenance in landscape in Dublin, and it's managing rather than maintaining, right? So maintaining means you're keeping everything looking
the same.
Red, flowers all year. So with managing, you're allowing the planting to evolve and develop, and as it does in nature, some things thrive more than others, and so that's what we've been doing over the years, is just orchestrating it, and so there's a huge beauty in that. So it's always different every single year. That has a slightly different palette, and that's the beauty of it, so it is something that I think if we did more and more of, people will accept it a bit more, and accept the beauty for, like what you did with your own field where you decided not to mow anymore, and then you realized when you looked at it and you're at that space that you go, there's more beauty in this. So I think it is exposure to it, maybe.
Yeah, I think exposure is the big thing.
Yeah.
I think that's what I was kind of getting at, is that the signs will tell you that this is being managed for biodiversity or whatever. But at a glance, as somebody's driving by, they'll see something, and as you said, it could be, most of the time it's going to be that looks untidy.
Yeah.
But that exposure to it and that understanding of it is key. And yeah, something like what you're saying you're doing in that park, where you take tours around, or speak to people about what's happening there. I think that's hugely important, and that message then will assimilate out through the population, I guess, through that way. Yeah.
But I think what those landscapes do as well is give us a much stronger connection to nature. They're natural, and you've got wildlife living in them, and and I think it's far more relaxing and peaceful than a formal sort of layout, It was interesting contrast. I was in a Northern European garden this summer, and there was monoplanting, like one species and maybe a different color, same species, a different color. And then it just looks so bland, and that it's not biodiverse because only one type of insect may live there. You want a lot of different, integrated ecology type habitats to be going on there.
Yeah, for sure. We've gone slightly off topic here, but I guess it still all ties into the overriding theme of the seminar coming up. But there's one excellent speaker who a lot of the listeners will know that we haven't spoken about yet, and that's Anne-Marie Powell. So if somebody wants to just tell us about what her talk is titled, and maybe a sort of a summary of what that will entail.
Well, I might jump in because it actually we've segued very carefully into her talk, because obviously she's all about, not only the visual, but creating habitats for wildlife in her gardens, So Anne-Marie Powell, obviously, lots of people know, is a highly acclaimed UK garden designer. And, so she's done a lot of RHS flower show gardens, which have been award winning. So her gardens her talk is about bold biodiversity for tomorrow's gardens. So again, she's looking at how adapting her aesthetic choices, but also have much more ecological principles based behind it in creating the gardens for the future to adapt to climate change. So I think hers will be really interesting, just with regards to, say, how transforming gardens into like sanctuaries for biodiversity, or extending pollinator seasons, all that sort of stuff. That's, again, I know we talked about Bridgewater Street Park, but it kind of moves into what Anne-Marie is going to be talking about. And again, it's all talking about the resilience, whether it's to water, drought, wind, and resilience for biodiversity and ecological kind of spaces within our garden. So I think she'd be really, really interesting. It'll be an interesting talk, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
It'll be a very interesting day, actually. And I have to say, I've been going to the seminars for years, and it's a very welcoming, warm environment. Everyone's there, everyone connects, chats. Really, I couldn't believe it the first time I went to it. I think the first one was 1996. And I kept going back each year for more. So, it really is a good day out, and it's lovely to catch up with people that you don't normally see from year to year.
Yeah, and I like over the last few years the teams, and I like I don't know all of the speakers again this year, but I like the way that the overall team is driving the individual talks, and how they're very, very relevant to what has been happening over the last few years and what will be happening into the future. So I think it's definitely something that should be interesting for a lot of people.
And as you said earlier, John, it gives the individual power to do their little bit on their plot,
Yeah, for sure.
I'd just like to note, sorry, before we forget, that we actually couldn't ever run a seminar without our sponsors, So just I wanted to mention that Board BIA have been a huge support, because they obviously realize the importance of bringing education and looking up research, or bringing research from all over the world to Ireland, So just want to make a shout out to Board BIA, but also then we've got two product sponsors Enrich Environmental, which are, hugely important from a soil point of view. And that's something we didn't touch upon. So all of this creating habitats or ecological spaces, and also then the developing of suds or rain gardens. It's the soil that actually does all that work.
Okay.
So really, and the health of your soil has a huge impact on how resilient your land is. So that would be really good. And then we've got Millboard, and so they've just recently come aboard. So that will be really interesting to hear what they have to say as well. So
yeah, Millboard are a decking company that does composite decking. If I'm correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So yeah. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to get that in just in case we didn't.
Yeah, no, that's all these events, they need sponsors and so on. So yeah, for sure. So in terms of tickets, obviously I got to put links in show notes, but tell people where they can direct people to where they can find it, where they can find out more about the GLDA, where they can buy tickets for the seminar and so on.
Yeah, it's the glda.ie.
Yeah.
If they go on to click and then click on the link for the tickets. So there's varying ticket prices there. For both the students are cheaper than the others. So if students want to come along, they're very welcome as well.
Yes.
And friends, and all different rates for people. So you don't have to be a member to come. You just have to have an interest in gardens and landscapes and resilience. Yeah.
And since you guys have done the posts on social media in relation to this a couple of months back, I see a lot of people sharing it and a lot of people talking about it, and a lot of people saying they're looking forward to certain speakers. So
yeah,
I think for sure it's going to be a great day. So it's the 22nd of February, which is a Saturday, and it's the Crown Plaza near the airport.
In Santry, yeah.
Yeah. So that sounds to be a great day. Deirdre and Kinta, it's been a really interesting chat. As I said, we probably would. We went in a lot of different directions, but I think we stayed true to the overriding theme of the conversation and of the upcoming seminar. So thank you very, very much for coming on Master My Garden podcast.
Thank you, John. Nice to meet you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, John. Bye.
That's been this week's episode. A huge thanks to Deirdre and Kinta for coming on. Yeah, really interesting chat. And as I said, lots of different directions covered. Certainly seeing what I saw this week, we definitely do need to build up resilience in the landscape and in our gardens to, weather events, be that storm, be that drought, or be that wind, and to have speakers coming from all over the world who are honing in on this and sort of guiding people on it, and I suppose bringing their findings on the matter over the last number of years to an Irish audience. I think that's something that'll be good. The link for the tickets will be in the show notes. And that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.